Hey folks, I've finally completed 100% of Digimon Story Time Stranger, and as someone who has been a huge Digimon fan since I was a child, it brings me great joy to see how far Digimon has come since the last games. As much as I enjoyed the more recent games such as Digimon Survive and Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory, Survive was a large departure from what we normally expect from Digimon games, with its visual novel and tactics style of gameplay, and Cyber Sleuth was a port from the PlayStation Vita. Time Stranger was our chance to see Digimon brought into the modern age of gaming with a style that we know and love, that being the story style of Digimon games, which is the JRPG style with party members and levels as opposed to monster raising VPET style of the World games. And wow, did they deliver. The story, characters, voice acting, boss fights, animations, truly improvements in every possible area, so much so that the gaming community at large has taken notice, and the game was recently announced to have sold more than 1 million copies already. The investment in marketing and on making this game the best it can be has paid off massively, and it has brought so much happiness to me and many other people, and seeing people embrace Digimon again and many others giving it a chance for the first time and having fun with the franchise that I love has been fantastic. As we'll get into, it wasn't all perfect, but it's pretty damn close, so let's begin talking about Digimon Story Time Stranger. Spoilers ahead. We start off being introduced to the world where we meet our protagonist, who is part of an organization known as Adamus, who investigates anomalies. When we got our first look at the design of these characters at the start of the year, I have to say I wasn't a huge fan of the mint green outfits, but at least Dan has the classic goggle head look that we're used to, which is pretty standard for most protagonists in Digimon. We are sent to investigate beyond a giant wall that is keeping part of the city segregated from the rest. We discover that this is due to the presence of Digimon in the real world, and we are given our first Digimon to help fight off the digital threat. In my case, I went with Gomamon, who was always a favourite personality of mine from the original anime. We are chased by a virus Metal Greymon before being saved by our new/old friend, Inori Misono. Inori is a very easy to love character, and although she is largely pretty useless in the story, she makes for a nice companion to have around, and her relationship with her partner Digimon Agumon is pretty much what the entire story revolves around, so perhaps I'm being a bit harsh to say that she's useless. Her backstory is quite interesting, as her mother and little brother were, unbeknownst to her, both killed by Digimon in a previous incident where Digimon came to the human world. This is showcased by the incredible anime short that was released shortly after the game, which shows Inori's brother being defended by a Deputymon, who evolves to Justimon and fights a Machinedramon, but it's implied that they ultimately fail to save the child, as Titamon shows up to claim the egg that Inori's brother is protecting, which I believe to be Agiumon's egg. I highly recommend that you watch this short, as it's very well done and the fight animation is really great. The quality of it really goes to show the effort that went into making Time Stranger a big release. After this, we reach our first boss fight, where an Omnimon comes to our aid. I thought it was really smart of them to have such an iconic and cool Digimon appear this early, and I saw many clips of newcomers to Digimon being amazed by Omnimon, and it helped to showcase the power levels that Digimon can reach later on.
What the hell is that? Holy Evangelion!
Boss fights in this game are vastly improved over previous games, as they come with some interesting mechanics. Most of them have a big attack that they charge up, which can be stopped by dealing big enough damage to a certain part of their body, but some have more complex mechanics like preventing item use or even reducing max HP if you heal. The boss fights actually require a good level of strategic thinking in order to succeed, even on balanced difficulty, which was what I chose for my first playthrough. Bringing certain Digimon that can remove stat buffs or have attacks that deal extra damage to the specific traits that the enemy has adds an enjoyable level of strategy that was missing from Cyber Sleuth and Hacker's Memory. The fact that you can swap your Digimon's attachment attacks around freely is a huge improvement as well, and a big quality of life change that allows for a quick change of strategy and lets the game flow much better. Without this change, there are certain bosses such as Volcanismon that would have been big roadblocks for me. You can also use an item once per each of your Digimon's turn, and in doing so does not prevent you from using a skill or attack. This was a change that I was worried would make the game far too easy, but the game is balanced very well, to the point where even if you try to min-max your items every fight, you'll eventually run out of money to buy those items, meaning that there's always a trade-off for having the optimal setup. As for the regular fights in the game, they are balanced pretty well as well, and quite varied, which is nice. You can use a feature called Digi Attack to get the first strike in battle, which is great as it automatically selects a Digimon from your party who has the best advantage to hit the enemy. If your Digimon are significantly stronger than the enemy, it'll even kill them before the fight even starts, which allows you to progress faster and rewards you if you spend time making your Digimon strong. We're introduced to converting and digivolving, all of which can now be done anywhere, and you don't have to return to Mirei every time to do so, which is by far the best change in my opinion. Having instant access to new Digimon and evolutions reduces the amount of time you spend backtracking and running around, which is again another huge quality of life improvement and makes the game flow much better. You can even evolve during battle if you have a hybrid Digimon or two Digimon that can DNA digivolve digivolve just like in the anime. I must admit it wasn't something I made use of during my playthrough, but the fact that it's possible is such a cool addition. The roster of Digimon available is larger than we've seen in any other game, and while there were some odd inclusions like Ancient Wisemon and some omissions like Harrismon that I was sad about, I overall feel like the roster was well thought out and included a wide range of cool Digimon. We will have to see what the announced DLC and potential future DLC add to the roster, but I'm still holding out hope for my boy Harrismon to be added. You do still have to return to Mirai at a hub space called the In-Between Theatre if you want to use the farm, which I would be fine with if it wasn't for the fact that the farm is somehow worse than in previous games. The biggest issue with it is that you need to take Digimon out of the farm to be able to see their Digivolution requirements and to actually Digivolve them, which is a huge pain as it resulted in me having to take notes on the stat requirements of the evolutions, as if I didn't then I would have had to spend a lot of time taking Digimon in and out of the farm. It's almost not even worth mentioning the fact that you can customize the farm, as it literally doesn't do anything. Even back in the DS games we had the ability to change the farm, and it granted various different amounts of XP that altered which Digimon you wanted on the island. But all the changes in Digimon Time Stranger's farm are purely cosmetic. The items that you gather to craft these cosmetic items are needless clutter that are scattered throughout the game. The crafting systems should have been left out entirely in this state, and if they wanted to keep it in then they should have made bonuses for having certain Digimon train next to certain items. For example, if you train a bird Digimon in speed near a lamppost, then they would gain extra bonuses to that stat upon completion. A simple thing like that would have made planning out a farm, and even deciding where to put your Digimon when training them, it would have made it actually interesting and allowed the player opportunities to make meaningful choices with the resources that they have. As it stands, the farm is the weakest part of Time Stranger, and I hope they at least make it so that you can Digivolve within the farm in a future update or a future game, which I think it's quite unlikely they'll patch the game to change the farm, but perhaps we'll get a Cybersleuth Hacker's Memory situation where they'll make a game based on Time Stranger's engine and we can get this improvement then. Benefit of using the farm is that you can max out any Digimon stats that you want through the training, meaning that if you wanted to use a rookie for the entire game then you actually could do that, as long as you keep training up their stats. I'm glad they brought this back from the DS games as it was a key feature there. It's a great thing to have for people who really like a certain Digimon but aren't much of a fan of their available Digivolutions. Another benefit of the farm is that you can change your Digimon's personalities through training. Personalities are another new addition and work similarly to natures in Pokemon, as they allow for certain stats to be boosted by a Digimon being a certain personality. It also affects what happens when you get an extra attack in battle, which depending on your Digimon's type and personality can result in heals, extra hits, stat buffs for your allies, or debuffs to your enemies. Personalities also affect Digivolution, and managing your Digimon's personality to get the evolution you want was a fun extra layer into completing your team. There is also the option to talk to your Digimon in the field, usually after completing a battle. Depending on your responses, you can shift their personality towards a different one, or maintain the current one. I found this part of the system to be a bit too slow compared to the farm, and it's a little awkward to use as you have to stay fairly still after a battle in order to talk to the Digimon. You often have to be kind of mean to them to get their personalities to change as well, which kind of feels bad. The skill tree can also be used to customize your character in Digimon. You're actually locked out of Digivolving to higher levels unless you spend points in this tree, so it's very important to engage in side quests to unlock higher evolutions as soon as possible. One of my biggest gripes in the game was how late you get access to Mega Evolutions, as I felt like I was using an ultimate level Digimon for the majority of the game, and this was due to me accidentally missing a side quest early on, which prevented me from getting enough points to raise my agent rank. The tree itself is for the most part not super interesting, it's just a bunch of passive bonuses that increase your strength in various ways, but there are odd one or two options that make a difference in gameplay, and these options can affect what personalities you want your Digimon to have, so the systems complement each other well. The biggest part of the skills tree, however, is the cross arts section. Cross arts are new abilities that the agent can use to shoot their Digigun for various effects, dealing huge damage to the enemy or buffing up your allies. Cross arts made for an interesting and fun addition that added an extra layer of strategy to the battle. They take a while to charge up, so choosing the right moment to use them can make or break difficult fights. A big surprise for me was seeing how many Digimon were available to ride. In my video I made shortly after the announcement, I thought for sure that these rides would only be set Digimon, but in reality there's a ton of Digimon that you can ride, and some like Mechanorimon and X-Tyrannomon have unique and fun versions of the ride mechanic, which is even better. I saw someone make a suggestion that they should allow you to set a Digimon to use as a ride Digimon even if they aren't in your party, and I think that would have been an excellent idea, as many ride Digimon that were not Digimon I would normally use as my party had really fun and cool looking rides that I would like to have used. I will briefly mention the outer dungeons, which are little mini games that you can play and get rewards such as level cap increasing items, and you can even get full on Digimon at the end. They're a fun distraction from the main story, but they're a little bit too simple, and the racing one in particular is a bit awkward, especially when trying to complete it without hitting any obstacles. To be honest, I don't really think they added enough to the game, and they wouldn't have been missed if they were not included. Another mini game, however, was the Jogmon card game, which you can play versus certain NPCs. The card game itself is very simple, where you just try and play your strongest cards. However, there's a bit of RNG, meaning that weaker cards can often win versus stronger cards. You can also combine certain cards if you meet certain conditions, which is a little bit of an addition to strategy. You need to keep them towards the end in order for the combination to occur. After the game, you get to take some cards as a reward for participating, and this lets you build a collection of cards that you can draw. It's a neat little addition, and it's not much more than that, but I did actually quite like it. And the feeling of it was reminiscent of using a V-Pet toy, which I thought was a really cool design choice. It's also a great excuse to add all the pixel art for the Digimon, which was no doubt a lot of extra work, but they look great. Anyway, as we advance further through the story, we end up in a pivotal moment in Time Stranger, which becomes known as the Shinjuku Inferno, a giant explosion that disrupts the fabric of space and time and plunges the world into disaster. This absolutely epic cutscene showcases the power of the explosion, and it's one of the best cutscenes in the game. We see the host computers of Yggdrasil, Kunlun, and Homeros in their human forms discussing the events, and I thought it was really cool to see that Kunlun was in this game, as Kunlun was revealed very recently, and it shows that it was a part of their plans for the franchise long before we knew about it. I must admit it was a bit of an odd choice to portray the hosts in this way, but I'm glad they were part of the game as it added a bit of intrigue and complexity to the world, and even for the franchise as a whole, because it shows a connection between the different parts of the digital world that we've never seen before. Shortly after this, we are introduced in quick succession to many minor characters in the story, such as Honori's dad, Dr. Simmons, the public safety officers Asuna, Kodai, and Shota, and streamer and Honori's friend Hiroko. Out of all of them so far, only Asuna and Dr. Simmons had any real interest, as Asuna ends up being partnered with a black Gatomon that later digivolves to a fan favourite Digimon Beal Starmon, and they help us in several missions later into the story, along with Dr. Simmons, who sides with us later on too, after her fascination with Digimon leads her to empathise with them. Hiroko and Honori's dad honestly had disappointing showings in the game. Hiroko was mostly there for some side quests and not much else. I also just didn't really enjoy her character very much. Honori's dad had the most wasted potential in my opinion, as he could have had a lot more interesting role as a human antagonist that would oppose us, even though Honori was his daughter. But by the time we see him again in the story, he only has a short cutscene, and then the plot moves too quickly for him to have much relevance outside of it. He is of course the main reason that the giant weapon that humanity creates is involved in the Inferno, but outside of that he doesn't do much. We've already seen that some of these characters will have roles to play in the DLC, so hopefully we'll see more of them there. Anyway, back to the story. After a couple of more boss fights, Honori bonds with an Elecmon who she calls Ku. He becomes her partner when it digivolves into Agiomon during a fight with a Cyclomon. Honori's character really shines in these scenes as we see this type of person her past has made her into, and the good and bad sides of that. She is caring to a fault, but that ends up allowing Elecmon to digivolve, and Agiomon becomes our party member. Agiomon for the most part is a pretty simple character. He is a prophesized hero who will defend the Digimon world for the coming threat, but despite the weight on his shoulders, he would rather spend his time with his partner Honori. The two have some great scenes where they talk about their bond, and Agiomon has a decent amount of character growth over the game, as he comes to terms with who he is and the responsibility that he has. Eventually, after a fight with a recurring villain Titamon, we end up in the digital world for the first time. The game does a great job of capturing the experience of finding yourself in a new world full of incredible creatures, and Central Town is such an excellent location to explore and meet characters for the beginning of the game. I had so much fun exploring and talking to the different Digimon that the town had to offer, and I love how alive Central Town feels. There's also lots of references to the partnered Digimon from the seasons of the anime, as they all tend to sort of stand together in groups. As you travel around the digital world, you go from the ocean to a factory and a jungle, and more, and all the areas feel vast and lived in, which is a huge step up from the quite boring digital plane that we had in Cybersleuth and Hacker's Memory. In each area you go to, you will encounter other Digimon who will help you on your journey, often by offering a means of traversal through the area. Submarimon will carry you through strong ocean currents, Palmon will swing you through vines, and everyone's favourite Gekomon will make retching sounds as he teleports you around random places through the dark area, based on what platitudes that you say to him. This is without a doubt the worst area in the game, entirely due to this Gekomon. First of all, why can this Gekomon teleport like this at all? It makes no sense for a Gekomon of all Digimon to have this power. They could, for example, have given it to a Digimon like Shamanmon, and then you could have made the argument that they use shaman magic to do it, and it would make a lot more sense to be in an area called the dark area instead of Gekomon, who obviously makes more sense to be in an aquatic area like the ocean. Thankfully, once you get the right answer once, the game marks it with a quest marker, but even still you need to backtrack a ton in order to get all the chests in the area, and each time you do this you have to hear the Gekomon retching and make the same comments every time you teleport. By far the worst character in the game, and really ruined a potentially great area of the game. Going back to the story, we eventually meet the Bearmon brothers, and with meeting them comes the next criticism of the game, which is the mouth movements of certain characters and cutscenes. They look very animatronic-like, and I really think I would have preferred it if the characters just opened their mouths when speaking and closed when they weren't. I understand it's difficult to animate these things, especially when considering multiple different languages, but it just looks very janky and it was a bit distracting. Through their quest, we are introduced to the Titans, which are the main group of antagonists causing problems in the digital world. The Titans are a group of mostly just bad guys. However, certain Digimon, like Ranamon and Titamon, had more interesting roles to play. Ranamon wasn't a very convincing traitor, and I didn't trust her right from the start, but I think my prior knowledge of Ranamon from her time as a frontier villain made me naturally more wary of her than I knew newcomer would be. Her betrayal of the humans could have been an interesting plot point, but it was largely unexplored. Titanmon had a good arc for a villain, going from a generic big bad to a world-ending threat with the power to control time, to eventually becoming an ally briefly as we discover the true enemy. I liked this character, and his leadership qualities really showed why the rest of the Titans follow him. He also felt like a genuine threat in his boss fights, which were quite tough. The shadow puppet cutscenes that we get were done by real artists, and it was another incredible part of this game. It was such a cool way to show the stories of the character, and the fact that it was all made and acted out by real people really shows the attention to detail and passion that was put into this game. They all look fantastic, and the way that the puppeteers move the character accurately shows their emotions. It's such a unique thing for this game to have, and I really loved it. Since we're talking about art, I'll also add in about the music. The music in the game has a great mix of tracks, all of which are enjoyable, and the main theme of the game, called Wherever You Are, is a beautiful song that matches the end of the game very well. All of the tracks were well written and fit the scenes used really well and added exceptionally well to the experience. Through these cutscenes we begin to meet the heroes of Iliad Server, which Time Stranger takes place in, who are the Olympus 12. These Digimon are based on gods of Greek and Roman myth. They each have their own little roles within the story as we help them out in some way or another, but they're war characters that got very sidelined compared to others. Ceresmon, for example, gets almost completely ignored, and it feels like there was definitely some cut content regarding her, as there was a part of the game where Venusmon, another member, needs a fruit called the Corpuscule, and it comes from the area where Ceresmon resides. Venusmon ends up getting it off screen, which I thought was really weird, and then Ceresmon kind of just shows up later on, so there was definitely some kind of quest or cutscene there that ended up not being added to the final part of the game, which is quite sad because Ceresmon is a really cool Digimon. Standout members include Venusmon and Bacchusmon, both of whom had great moments in the story. Venusmon is originally a Shellmon who we help save a Divermon, and that Divermon ends up becoming Neptunemon of the Olympus 12. Her story arc intertwines with many other members, and she is basically a doctor who helps cure many ailments and injuries that happen. Her story with Neptunemon and Ranamon's betrayal was well done and was a standout part of the game for me. Bacchusmon had a story that involved quite a dark subject, that being alcoholism. Any long-time Digimon fan will know that despite largely being marketed towards kids, Digimon has never strayed away from darker topics such as death, and Time Stranger is no exception. Bacchusmon is a strong protector of the forest current, but the responsibility of it drives him to alcohol, leading to Sirenmon, who eventually becomes Ceresmon, to take on the brunt of the responsibility, which leads to disaster. Before we travel back in time to save him, Bacchusmon actually takes his own life, because his failure to protect his friends causes his life to lose all meaning. It's a very sad story, but it doesn't pull any punches, even around the sensitive subject matter, and Digimon will always have my respect for keeping stories like this as a part of the franchise, as it makes Digimon feel more real than other shows and games. I'll now talk about the operator a little bit. Whichever character you don't choose to play as becomes the operator. Their role is basically to remind you of the stakes and what your goals are. There's a lot of discussion online about this character and how often they remind you of your adoptive father, Dr. Yuki. I must admit that during my initial playthrough they didn't bother me at all, but I think that's because I was taking my time doing side quests and other things. But if you do a lot of main quests in a row like I did in my Mega Plus playthrough, then they can end up feeling like a broken record that constantly reminds you of things you already know. As we reach the end of the game and discover our true identity, the operator explains that they only exist in our head, and their dialogue throughout the game makes more sense, but it doesn't remove from the fact that they were a bit repetitive. After beating Plutomon, we see cutscenes where we learn of Chronomon, the true evil who fabricated a story of them being a hero that saved the digital world, and branded the Titans as villains. In reality, Chronomon learned of the higher being, and of the Akashic records that show that every action taken is predetermined, and no one can escape the flow of time. Chronomon can't accept this, and ends up being the one who orders the Titans to fight the higher being, and as punishment for their eventual defeat, he gets sealed away. This leads to him creating Agiomon, who he created to be the one to end his life and take his place as the ruler of time. The final fight with him is well set up, and the Olympus 12 will gather to help out with the fight, along with the Royal Knights, who will also appear if you do their side quests, in a couple of really awesome cutscenes. The fight itself is epic, as Chronomon will use these crazy looking attacks and even degenerate your Digimon down to the lowest Digivolution stage, and you have to battle back up to full strength. A really cool feature for a boss fight when the boss can control time. He monologues to you the whole fight as well, which, although it's kind of hard to follow when his attacks are happening, I liked it nonetheless, as it made it feel like I was part of a legendary moment. Overall, I think the twist was handled very well, and I don't think anyone would have seen it coming. I certainly didn't. The time travel elements allowed the narrative to be dynamic, but never so much so that I found it hard to follow or convoluted. The protagonist and Agiomon combining to become Jupermon, and fighting the initial battle with Chronomon and Grace Novamon using their power to pull away away anyone who might be harmed was really awesome, and the scenes after the final fight with Chronomon, where Jupitermon and Inori have to part ways, carry a lot of significant emotional weight, especially seeing Inori and her brother again at the end. It was a very satisfying and happy conclusion, with lots of hype moments in the final fights. After that, I had successfully completed 100% of Digimon Storytime Stranger, and I absolutely loved it. Digimon has been having a huge resurgence recently with the card game, the new anime Beat Break, the comics, and of course this game. And knowing that there are dubs for both Ghost Game and Beat Break out now is huge for the franchise. If you've made it all the way to the end, please continue supporting and enjoying Digimon. I hope you are looking forward to the DLC and the rest of the incredible things that Digimon has coming. Thanks for watching.